Do you feel lost, like you've wandered into a dense, shadowed wood, unsure of the path forward? Do distractions pull you from the still, small voice, leaving your soul restless and searching? Have you felt the weight of silence and wondered if God has left you alone? Here on the Distracted Christian Podcast, we walk that dark night together. Every step draws us closer to the one who's been waiting. His love is the light that guides, His grace, the compass that never fails.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Distracted Christian Podcast. I am Wes Scott, and I am your guest host for the next few episodes. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. I know I introduced myself a few times already, but just to give you a little idea of the person that you're learning from. I'm sitting in my family's game room. It is about 11 something at night at the moment, and I am looking at my Goofy phone that I've had since I was a teenager. Yes, as a actual Goofy phone, Goofy from Disney. Goofy is one of my favorite Disney characters. I love Goofy and Stitch. Stitch because he is disgusting and indestructible. And I also like Goofy because he is goofy. He's just one of my favorite characters. I had a Goofy watch when I was a kid. It actually ran backwards. That was kind of neat. And this Goofy phone, it doesn't work anymore, but when someone would call the house, it would wake up. Goofy wakes up and says something like, "Oh, the telephone's ringing." And my kids like my Goofy voice. So yeah, that kind of sums up my personality. And so you'll just know kind of who is talking about Ruth 3 today. So without further ado, let's get into the podcast. Okay, seriously, that's the last time I'm going to do a Goofy voice, and the rest of the podcast will be serious. So, all right. So, yeah, we are in our third episode in a series entitled Strange Passages, Their Meanings and Applications. And this week I will be teaching on Ruth 3, 1 through 11. But first, I want to mention a few points about the book of Ruth as a whole. The book of Ruth was originally placed in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, if you will, between Proverbs and the Song of Solomon, in the writing section, or Ketuvim. The Tanakh was ordered in 3 different sections: the Law, the Prophets, and the Writings. This is the ordering that Jesus actually talks about in Luke 24:44, which states, "And he said to them, 'These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything that is written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and Psalms,' or writings, 'must be fulfilled.'" The ordering of the Tanakh was how the Hebrews ordered the Old Testament before the Greeks reordered the books into what they deemed a more chronological arrangement, which is the ordering we have today in our English Bibles. I believe that both styles of sorting the scriptures are valid and appropriate for reading and interpretation. If you want a great book that comments on the Tanakh, I suggest you read Dominion and Dynasty, a Theology of the Hebrew Bible by Stephen G. Dempster. The arrangement of the Tanakh will be discussed and important in the latter part of this episode. The book of Ruth opens with a man named Elimelech. an ancestor of David. Now, this is the second point. Second point about the book of Ruth, right? The book of Ruth opens with a man named Elimelech, an ancestor of David and an ancestor of Jesus Christ, leaving his home, which was Bethlehem, the city of David, and the place where Christ was born. All right, guys, this stuff isn't just a coincidence. All right. The fact that Bethlehem is the central focus place in Ruth is not a coincidence. That is, where that is the city of David, and that is the birthplace of Christ. Not all of this is not just a coincidence. Okay, Yahweh has a plan, and you can see his plan unfold even in the stories of the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. It all works together. Okay, Elimelech leaves there to go to the land of Moab. Now, the book of Ruth is taking place during the times of the judges. Last week, I talked on the left-handed deliverer, left-handed assassin, that Yahweh raised up for Israel that delivered them from their oppressors, the Moabites. Now, Elimelech has now traveled to Moab. All right. He has traveled to Moab so that his family can have a better life. This is crazy, right? How all of this is working out. Now, Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, the widow of Elimelech, travel back from Moab, right, to Bethlehem. Through them coming back to Bethlehem, the lineage of the Savior of all those who would come to him, Jesus Christ, is continued. Isn't that's wild, right? That all of this is working together. Yahweh had all this planned out, and all of this works together to bring about the birth of Jesus Christ. All right. This is all about his story as well. Now, number 3 about the book of Ruth. While I will be focusing on 2 major ideas in the chapter 3, the book of Ruth also tells an amazing story of faith, hope, love, and redemption that no one should pass up reading as just a true, fun, exciting story. I have a fun book that I read once a year called The Witch of Blackbird Pond. It is just a fun story that I enjoy because it makes me laugh, cry, get angry, and think. The book of Ruth is like that for me. Not only do I find theological truths about Yahweh and Christ in Ruth, but I also find in it just a great story to read. Ruth can just be fun and interesting. Just like picking up a book from the bookstore or the library. And this is just a fun story just to pick up and read. So let's delve into Ruth chapter 3. And we're going to read verses 1 through 11. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, now Naomi is talking to Ruth. Now, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now is not Boaz our kinsman with those whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet, and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do. She said to her, all that you say I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Then he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first, by not going after young men, whether rich or poor. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence." Up till this point, in the story of Ruth, she has been working in the fields that are owned by a man named Boaz, so she and her mother-in-law can have food to eat. Boaz notices her, hears how she has been taking care of her mother-in-law, and how she is a woman of honor. He tells his workers to leave her even more grain. When Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, hears what he has done, she basically tells Ruth to make sure Boaz knows she is available for marriage. What actually does happen next in the story is what makes this story interesting. She proposes marriage to Boaz, or at least she makes sure he knows she is interested. This passage states that she fixes herself up, all right, puts on makeup or whatever, makes herself look all pretty, goes to him after he lays down for the night, uncovers his feet, and lays down next to him to propose marriage. Now, the Hebrew word used in verse 8 for feet is used in several passages in the Old Testament as a euphemism for the private parts of the human body. Ruth uncovers him at the waist, not down at the feet, in order to propose marriage to him. This word is used this way in Deuteronomy 28:57, Ezekiel 16:25, and Exodus 4:18 through 31. This research is found in mainstream biblical scholarly work. Also, Dr. Heiser talks about this at length in his Naked Bible Podcast, episode 265, on Exodus 4:18 through 25. In Exodus 4, Zipporah, Moses' wife, performs the circumcision on their son and touches his foreskin to Moses' feet. I'm using quotation marks in the air for feet there. That is again a place where the Hebrew writer used the euphemism. There, Zipporah performed the ritual rite and symbolically performed the circumcision of Moses. It would not make sense for the symbolism to take place if she actually placed Gershom's foreskin to the feet of Moses. Now, this is where I think the story of Ruth turns really weird. Not only does Ruth expose the midsection, to use a euphemism for this episode, but it is she who's doing the proposing in what we would think is an odd way to do so. This must have been a culturally appropriate way to do this because Moses is not at all surprised. But know that, it is surprising to us. It's weird. It's strange. This is a strange custom to have, especially to Western thinkers and to Western society. Now, also bear it in mind that there was nothing sexual going about this encounter they had that night. That would have gone against the kinsman-redeemer law of which Ruth was asking Boaz to take part. They could not have relations until after they were married, or they would have broken the law. However, for us, this act is a very strange act indeed. This is a really weird way to ask someone to marry you. Now, also another point about this passage. At the end of this passage, in verse 11, Boaz calls Ruth a woman of excellence. That's what it says in the New American Standard Version. In the Hebrew, the phrase is a woman of strength. There are only 3 places where this phrase is found in the Old Testament. Proverbs 31:3, Proverbs 31:10, and Ruth 3:11. Ruth 3:11 is where Boaz calls her a woman of strength. If you remember, in the very beginning of the episode, I talked about the original ordering of the Old Testament being different than how it is ordered now. In the Tanakh, Ruth was positioned after Proverbs, which makes no sense chronologically since Ruth is a great-grandmother of Solomon. However, this makes perfect sense when it comes to interpreting Ruth in light of a canonical interpretation. The editor of the Old Testament. Now, let me take a moment and talk about what I mean by editor of the Old Testament. There's a clear editorial hand when it comes to looking at the Old Testament, and especially in the Tanakh ordering, the Hebrew ordering of the Old Testament. There was a clear editorial hand. Now, a lot of scholars think that the editor would have been Ezra or Nehemiah, that's when the Tanakh would have had its final form. Whatever you believe in this way, we know that there's an editor who put the books and ordered the books in such a way, in the ways that they did. Now, we know that the Greeks came along, and there were Greeks that even Greek-speaking Hebrews that reordered it in a more chronological way, and that's what we have in our English Bibles today. We went over that earlier in the episode as well. So there was an editor who edited the Old Testament, and I don't think that is at all an issue when interpreting. I think that actually helps when interpreting the Old Testament in a lot of ways. So the editor of the Old Testament was interpreting Ruth as an example of the Proverbs 31 woman. In putting Ruth after Proverbs, he's saying that Ruth was an example of this woman. He noticed that Boaz used the same wording to describe Ruth as the writer of Proverbs did to describe the Proverbs 31 woman. That is why Proverbs is juxtaposed before Ruth. Ruth is an example of the Proverbs 31 woman. She is a woman of strength. Now, how do we apply this all to our lives, right? Bible is supposed to change us. Bible is supposed to help us through this life. And how does all these points, how does all of this in the book of Ruth help us with our lives? Well, 1, Ruth trusted her mother-in-law enough to go and do what she said and propose marriage to Boaz. Now, I'm definitely not saying that we should do what Ruth did. That would be culturally inappropriate, and that could definitely have some serious negative consequences. However, Naomi was older, more experienced, and had been an Israelite in the Israelite culture longer than Ruth. She knew the customs, and she knew who Boaz was. My point is that every Christian should find a more experienced Christian to disciple them. In fact, we should find 2 or 3 or get involved in a small group of other believers of all different spiritual ages to help each other grow. The early church ate, worshiped, prayed, read the Bible, and lived life together daily. Daily. In this age, with the technology that we have no excuse to not be involved in each other's lives up to a certain point. Yes, I'm not saying that we should get in there and be intrusive, especially for introverts. That can scare them away. But what I am saying is that a text to encourage someone in living this Christian life, a phone call, a Facebook message, anything like that, actually sitting down and talking to someone, having coffee with someone, or just being there and all together and living life together and helping each other through this life. Naomi and Ruth both helped each other. They were family, and we are a Christian family, and therefore we should act like a Christian family and be there for one another and love each other. And yeah, it will get messy. You know how messy it must have been for Ruth? How messy it must have been to leave Moab and everything she had, and that's actually moving into the next point. But you know how hard that was? And they did it together. They didn't just be their own person. They lived life together, and that is how Christians are supposed to be. We are to live life together. But the second point is this: everyone, not just women, everyone can learn from Ruth and the Proverbs 31 woman about being loyal, just, hardworking, and leaving everything we have to follow Christ. Ruth left her homeland to follow her mother-in-law because she loved her and loved Yahweh. How loyal are we to the people of Yahweh and to Yahweh himself? Would we give everything up to follow him wherever he wants us to go? Some of you may have already done that. You may be a missionary. You may serve in a boys or girls home, living there instead of a place of your own. Maybe you live in a small little apartment in a city because you serve in missions. That is awesome. If that is where Christ has called you, then be as Ruth and keep being loyal to Christ and to those who he has called you to serve. If Christ has called you to serve the local church by using the resources he has given you, that is just as honorable and loyal as being a missionary on the field. Whatever Christ has called you to do, love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Destructive Christian Podcast, and I hope you have learned something new and interesting. Please remember to keep looking for the weird in the Bible. It's fun, interesting, and engaging. And as Dr. Heiser would say, it's probably important. Have fun out there.
Special thanks to Anton Koryakov for today's theme music on the show. Tune in to hear more next time. Thanks for listening.